Sarah thought removing her own pool would be simple, until her neighbor Karen claimed it was animal abuse. One phone call to animal control would shatter two families, expose buried secrets, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous predators don't have four legs. What started as a property dispute would end with handcuffs, headlines, and a truth so twisted that even the authorities couldn't believe it. The hydraulic whine of the excavator cut through the morning air like a mechanical scream. Sarah Chen stood in her backyard, arms crossed, watching 20 years of memories disappear one bucket load at a time. The kidney-shaped pool that had hosted countless birthday parties, summer barbecues, and lazy Sunday afternoons was being systematically demolished, reduced to chunks of concrete and twisted rebar. "You sure about this, Mrs. Chen?" Mike, the excavator operator, called down from his cab. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool October morning. "Pool's in decent shape. Seems like a waste." Sarah nodded firmly. "I'm sure. The maintenance costs are killing me, and with Emma off to college." She trailed off, not mentioning the real reason, that every time she looked at the pool, she saw her ex-husband Tom pushing their daughter on the inflatable unicorn, heard his laughter echoing off the water before everything fell apart. The machine's hydraulic arm swung down again, and another section of the pool's edge crumbled. Sarah winced but held her ground. This was the right decision. The insurance alone was costing her $800 a year, not to mention the chemicals, the cleaning, the constant repairs to the filtration system. Destroying paradise, are we? Sarah turned to find Karen Whitfield standing at the chain-link fence that separated their properties. Even at 9 in the morning, Karen was impeccably dressed in her usual uniform, pressed khakis, polo shirt, and the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. Her golden retriever, Buddy, sat obediently at her heel, his tongue lolling out, as he panted in the warming sun. "Good morning, Karen." Sarah kept her voice neutral. After 5 years of living next door to Karen, she'd learned that any conversation could quickly spiral into a dissertation on property values, neighborhood standards, or the appropriate way to maintain one's yard. "I have to say, I'm surprised." Karen's manicured fingers drummed against the fence post. "When I saw the excavator pull up, I thought maybe you were finally installing that proper drainage system I mentioned. But this..." She gestured vaguely. "At the destruction. This seems rather drastic." "It's my property, Karen. My decision." Of course, of course." Karen's smile tightened. "Though I have to wonder if you've considered how this affects the rest of us. Property values, you know. A nice pool adds character to the neighborhood, attracts the right kind of families." Sarah bit back her first response, that Karen had never had children and seemed to regard anyone under 30 with deep suspicion. Instead, she said, "I've done my research. Pools can actually decrease property value in some markets, especially older ones that need work." Karen's gaze shifted to Buddy, who had risen to his feet and was pressing his nose through the chain link, whining softly. "Poor Buddy's going to miss it terribly. He loves watching the water. Sometimes I'd bring him over here just to sit by the pool's edge. So calming for him." "You never asked permission to bring him into my yard," Sarah said, feeling her patience begin to fray. "Oh, you weren't home most of those times. I didn't think you'd mind. Buddy's such a gentle soul. Never caused any trouble." Karen reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Animals form attachments, you know. They don't understand human decisions the way we do." The excavator's engine roared louder as Mike began working on the deep end. Chunks of concrete crashed into the growing pile of debris with thunderous impacts that made both women flinch. "I should get going," Sarah said, checking her watch. "I have to be at work in an hour." "Of course. Your little teaching job." Karen's tone made it sound like Sarah was playing house rather than educating 35 fourth graders. "Though I do hope you'll reconsider the landscaping when this is all finished. Maybe something with native plants? The city has guidelines about water runoff, you know. Very strict guidelines." Sarah was saved from responding by her phone buzzing. A text from her daughter Emma. "Saw the pics you sent. Can't believe you're really doing it. Dad's going to freak when he finds out." She slipped the phone back into her pocket without responding. Tom would find out eventually, probably from Karen, who seemed to have an uncanny ability to insert herself into every neighborhood drama, but Sarah wasn't ready for that conversation yet. "Mrs. Chen." Mike's voice carried over the machinery. "Noise. I'm gonna need you to move your car. Got to get the truck closer to haul this debris out." "Of course." Sarah fished her keys from her purse. "Karen, I really do need to—" "Animal control," Karen said suddenly. "What?" "I was just thinking about animal control. They have very specific regulations about removing water sources that animals depend on, especially in residential areas." Karen's smile had returned, but there was something sharp behind it. Now, like a blade wrapped in silk. "Buddy's been drinking from your pool for years. It's practically his primary water source when we're in the backyard." Sarah stared at her neighbor. "He has a water bowl. I've seen it." "Well, yes, but animals are creatures of habit. Disrupting their established patterns can cause significant stress, sometimes even illness." Karen's voice had taken on the lecturing tone she usually reserved for discussions about proper garbage can placement or the appropriate height for hedges. "I'd hate to have to call them, but if Buddy starts showing signs of distress—" The threat hung in the air between them like smoke. Sarah felt her heart rate quicken, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Karen, that's ridiculous. Animal control deals with abuse and neglect cases, not property improvements." "Oh, I'm sure you're right." Karen's smile widened. "Though they do investigate any situation where an animal's welfare might be compromised. It's really quite comprehensive. Their scope of responsibility. I know because I volunteer at the shelter sometimes. They take community reports very seriously." Mike honked the excavator's horn, and Sarah realized she was still blocking the debris truck's path. She started toward her Honda, then turned back. To Karen. "Are you threatening me?" "Threatening?" Karen pressed her hand to her chest in mock surprise. "Sarah, dear, I'm simply expressing concern for Buddy's well-being, as any responsible pet owner would. Though I suppose if you're determined to proceed with this destruction, there's nothing I can do to stop you." Sarah wanted to respond, wanted to point out the absurdity of suggesting that removing her own pool constituted animal cruelty, but Mike was gesturing impatiently from his cab. She climbed into her car and backed out of the driveway, parking on the street. By the time she returned to the backyard, Karen had disappeared, though Buddy remained at the fence, still whining at the demolition. Sarah tried to focus on Mike's progress reports and the growing pile of broken concrete, but Karen's words echoed in her mind. It was a bluff, surely. No one would actually call animal control over a pool removal. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. Sarah Chen. "Yes. This is Officer Rodriguez with Metro Animal Control. I understand you've received a complaint regarding potential animal welfare violations on your property. I'll need to schedule a time to come out and inspect the situation." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. Through the fence, she could see Karen's kitchen window. The curtains twitched closed just as Sarah looked up. "There must be some mistake," Sarah said, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. "I'm not violating any animal welfare laws. I don't even have any pets." The complaint specifically mentions the removal of a water source that neighborhood animals have come to depend on. "Can you confirm that you're currently having a swimming pool removed from your property?" Sarah watched the excavator take another massive bite out of her pool's concrete shell. "Yes, but I'll need to see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to discuss this matter. Do you have an address I can confirm?" In a daze, Sarah gave him her address and hung up. Across the yard, Mike was shutting down the equipment for his lunch break. The pool was half destroyed, a gaping wound in her backyard filled with rubble and standing water. Karen emerged from her house, Buddy trotting beside her on his leash. She waved cheerfully as she passed Sarah's driveway. "Have a lovely day at work, dear," she called out. "I do hope everything works out with your project." As Karen disappeared around the corner, walking Buddy toward the neighborhood park, where a perfectly functional dog fountain had been installed just 6 months ago, Sarah realized she was shaking. She had no idea that in less than 24 hours, Officer Rodriguez would be standing in her backyard with a citation book, or that Karen's seemingly innocent phone call would set in motion a series of events that would expose secrets both women had worked years to bury. She couldn't know that the real water source animal control would be concerned about wasn't the pool at all, but the illegal dog breeding operation Karen had been running in her basement for the past 3 years. All Sarah knew was that her simple decision to remove her pool had just become something much more dangerous. And Karen Whitfield had just. Officer Miguel Rodriguez had been with Metro Animal Control for 8 years, long enough to recognize the difference between legitimate welfare concerns and neighborhood vendettas. As he pulled into Maple Street the next morning, his practiced eye immediately assessed the situation. Well-maintained suburban homes, manicured lawns, the kind of middle-class battleground where property disputes masqueraded as moral crusades. Sarah Chen was waiting on her front porch, clutching a coffee mug like a lifeline. She looked exactly like what she was, a divorce teacher trying to hold her life together, not someone who tortured animals for sport. Mrs. Chen. Rodriguez climbed out of his white county vehicle, clipboard in hand. Thank you for making time this morning. Officer Rodriguez. Sarah stood, smoothing down her cardigan. I have to say, I'm still confused about why you're here. I'm removing my own pool from my own property. I can't see how that violates any animal welfare laws. Rodriguez had wondered the same thing during the drive-over. The complaint had been filed by one Karen Whitfield, who'd claimed that removing the pool would cause severe psychological distress and potential dehydration to her dog and other neighborhood animals. In 8 years of service, he'd never received a complaint quite like it. Mind if we take a look at the area in question? Sarah led him through the side gate into her backyard. The excavation was more extensive than Rodriguez had expected. A massive crater where the pool had been, surrounded by neat piles of broken concrete and twisted metal. The work looked professional, properly permitted. When did you start the removal process? Yesterday morning. I hired Morrison Construction. They're licensed and bonded. I pulled all the necessary permits through the city. Sarah's voice carried the defensive tone of someone who'd done their homework. You can check with the building department if you need to verify. Rodriguez made notes on his clipboard. The excavation site showed no signs of environmental hazard, no obvious safety violations. Water from yesterday's work had been properly contained and was already evaporating in the morning sun. The complainant mentioned that neighborhood animals, specifically her dog, had been using your pool as a water source. Her dog isn't supposed to be in my yard without permission. Sarah's jaw tightened. And there's a dog fountain at the park 2 blocks away. Plus, every house on this street has outdoor spigots. A sharp barking drew Rodriguez's attention to the fence line. A golden retriever had appeared in the neighboring yard, pressing against the chain link and whining at the demolition site. That's Buddy, Sarah said, following his gaze. Karen's dog. Has he been in your yard regularly? Karen claimed she brought him over sometimes when I wasn't home, without asking permission. Sarah's voice carried an edge of old frustration. Yesterday she threatened to call you if I continued with the pool removal. Said it would cause Buddy psychological distress. Rodriguez had heard enough neighborhood disputes to recognize the pattern. Property disagreements that escalated into bureaucratic warfare, with animal welfare used as a weapon. He was about to close his notebook when a sound from the neighboring house caught his attention. More barking. Multiple dogs, not just the golden retriever. Does your neighbor have more than one dog? Rodriguez asked. Sarah paused, tilting her head to listen. I'm not sure. I've only ever seen Buddy. But now that you mention it, sometimes I hear barking at odd hours. I assumed it was dogs from other yards. The barking intensified, coming clearly from Karen Whitfield's basement. Rodriguez counted at least 4 distinct voices, possibly more. His instincts, honed by years of investigating animal welfare cases, began to prickle. Mrs. Chen, I'm going to classify this complaint as unfounded. You're well within your rights to modify your property, and there's no evidence of animal welfare violations here. Relief flooded Sarah's face. Thank you. I was worried. However, Rodriguez continued, I'd like to speak with your neighbor about her concerns. Professional courtesy. They walked to Karen's front door together. Rodriguez noticed details that spoke to his trained eye. Windows in. The basement were covered with thick curtains, unusual for a residential property. The yard was immaculate, almost sterile, without the scattered toys or worn patches that typically came with dog ownership. Most telling was the industrial grade air filtration unit humming quietly beside the house, expensive equipment for a single pet household. Karen answered the door wearing the same pressed khakis and polo shirt uniform, but her smile faltered when she saw Rodriguez's county badge and clipboard. Mrs. Whitfield? I'm Officer Rodriguez with Metro Animal Control. I understand you filed a complaint regarding the pool removal next door. Oh yes, thank you for coming so quickly. Karen's composure returned like a mask sliding into place. I'm just so concerned about the animals in our neighborhood. Poor Buddy has been absolutely beside himself since the demolition started. As if summoned, Buddy appeared behind Karen, tail wagging. But Rodriguez noticed something odd. The dog showed no signs of distress. His coat was glossy, his eyes bright, his behavior entirely normal for a well-cared-for pet. He seems fine. To me, Rodriguez observed. Well, animals hide their suffering, Karen said quickly. It's instinctual. But I know my dog, and I can tell he's been affected by losing his water source. More barking erupted from somewhere deeper in the house. Karen's eyes flickered with what Rodriguez recognized as panic. Sounds like you have more than one dog. He said casually, Oh, that's just the television. I was watching a dog show when you knocked. Karen's laugh sounded forced. You know how realistic they make those nature programs these days. Rodriguez had been doing this job too long to miss the tells. The defensive posture, the quick explanations, the way Karen positioned herself in the doorway to block his view into the house. His nose caught something too, the faint but unmistakable smell of multiple animals, the kind of concentrated scent that came from housing too many pets in too small a space. Mrs. Whitfield, I'd like to ask you a few questions about pet ownership in the neighborhood. Mind if I come in? Actually, this isn't a good time. Karen's hand tightened on the doorknob. I was just heading out to run errands. Perhaps we could schedule something for later in the week. The barking intensified, and now Rodriguez could distinguish individual animals, different breeds, different vocal patterns. His years of experience told him he was looking at a situation far more serious than a neighbor complaining about a pool removal. I'm going to need to see your pet licenses and vaccination records. Karen's face went pale beneath her careful makeup. Of course. They're around here somewhere. Like I said, this really isn't a good time. The barking suggests multiple animals on the premises. City ordinance requires licenses for each pet, and there are limits on the number of animals per residential property. Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Karen glanced nervously at Sarah, who was watching the exchange with growing realization. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Rodriguez stepped closer to the door. The smell was stronger now, not just multiple dogs, but the telltale odor of inadequate ventilation and overcrowding. His radio crackled to life with a routine call, but he ignored it. Mrs. Whitfield, I'm conducting an animal welfare investigation. I have probable cause to believe there may be violations occurring on this property. I can either wait while you gather your documentation, or I can return with a warrant and additional officers. The careful facade cracked. Karen's hand shook as she smoothed her already perfect hair. This is harassment. I called you about my neighbor's pool, not about my pets. Actually, your call about the pool led me here. And now I'm discovering what appears to be an unlicensed breeding operation. Rodriguez pulled out his phone. I'm calling for backup and requesting an immediate inspection warrant. Wait. Karen's voice cracked. Please. I can explain everything. I'm a registered breeder. I have documentation. Then why the deception about having multiple animals? Rodriguez was already dialing. Mrs. Chen, I'm going to need you to remain available as a witness. Sarah stepped forward, her earlier anxiety replaced by something harder. Karen, exactly how many dogs do you have in there? From the basement came the sound of frantic scratching, multiple animals in distress. The barking had become continuous, desperate. Rodriguez spoke quickly into his phone, requesting immediate backup and a veterinary team. Karen Whitfield, woman who'd spent years lecturing neighbors about property values and appropriate behavior, who'd weaponized city bureaucracy against anyone who didn't meet her standards, stood in her doorway with a perfect facade crumbling around her. You don't understand, she whispered. I love animals. Everything I do is for their benefit. Rodriguez had heard those words before, from hoarders and backyard breeders and people who confused control with care. As his backup unit screamed, down Maple Street, he realized that Sarah Chen's pool removal had just uncovered one of the worst animal welfare cases he'd encountered in his career. Karen Whitfield had called animal control to punish her neighbor. Instead, she'd just destroyed herself. The basement of 1247 Maple Street was a portrait of systematic cruelty disguised as care. Officer Rodriguez descended the narrow stairs behind his backup team, the smell hitting him like a physical blow, ammonia, fear, and the concentrated musk of too many animals in too small a space. His flashlight beam cut through the dim air, revealing a sight that would haunt his dreams for months. Dozens of wire cages lined the concrete walls, stacked 3 high in places. Golden retrievers, labs, designer doodle mixers, all crammed into spaces barely large enough for them to stand. Some paced frantically, others lay motionless in corners, their eyes reflecting the artificial light with the hollow stare of animals who'd given up hope. Jesus Christ, muttered Officer Sarah Kim, Rodriguez's backup. She'd seen puppy mills before, but never hidden beneath the veneer of suburban respectability. How many are we looking at? Rodriguez was already counting, his trained eye assessing. Each cage with practiced efficiency. 47 so far. And we haven't reached the back room yet. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the emergency veterinarian who'd arrived with the second wave of responders, was already examining the nearest cage. Inside, a female golden retriever lay on her side, ribs visible through matted fur, nursing a litter of puppies that looked barely a week old. This female is severely malnourished, Dr. Walsh called out. She's been bred continuously. I can see evidence of at least 4 recent litters. Her body condition is critical. Upstairs, they could hear Karen's voice rising in pitch as she argued with the lead investigator. You can't just storm into my home. These are my pets. I'm a registered breeder with the American Kennel Club. Please step aside, came the firm response. We have a warrant. Rodriguez moved deeper into the basement, documenting everything with his camera. The floor was concrete, stained with years of neglect. Water bowls sat empty or contaminated with green algae. The ventilation system Karen had installed outside was working overtime, but it couldn't keep pace with the biological reality of housing this many animals in such confined quarters. Rodriguez, you need to see this. Officer Kim was standing beside a metal desk pushed against the far wall. Scattered across its surface were breeding charts, vaccination records, and financial documents. But what caught Rodriguez's attention were the bank statements, thousands of dollars in deposits from Suburban Paws Kennel, Golden Dreams Breeding, and 6 other business names. She's been running multiple operations under different names, Kim said, flipping through a ledger. Look at these prices. $3,000 for a golden doodle puppy, $2,500 for a purebred lab. She's been moving serious money. Rodriguez photographed each document while his mind calculated the scope of the operation. Conservative. Estimates put Karen's annual income from the breeding operation at over $200,000, all of it unreported, all of it built on animal suffering. A commotion from upstairs drew their attention. Heavy footsteps, raised voices, the sound of furniture being moved. Then Sarah Chen's voice, clear and carrying, Officer Rodriguez, you need to come up here right now. Rodriguez climbed the stairs to find chaos in Karen's pristine kitchen. The granite countertops were covered with seized documents, and Detective Lisa Torres from the County Fraud Unit was bagging evidence with methodical efficiency. Karen sat at her breakfast table, no longer the composed suburban queen but a middle-aged woman whose world was collapsing in real time. What's the situation? Rodriguez asked. Detective Torres held up a manila folder thick with papers. Your neighbor complaint just became a major financial crimes investigation. Mrs. Whitfield here has been operating an unlicensed commercial breeding facility while claiming her property as a residential homestead for tax purposes. We're looking at tax evasion, animal cruelty, operating a business without proper permits, and about 6 different zoning violations. Sarah Chen stood near the kitchen window, her face pale but her voice steady. Officer Rodriguez, I think there's something else you should know. About the pool. The pool. Show him the photos, Karen. Sarah's voice carried a new authority, the tone of someone who'd finally understood the scope of her neighbor's deception. Show him what you really didn't want me to discover. Karen's composure cracked completely. Sarah, please. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly. Sarah turned to Rodriguez. Yesterday, when Karen was so concerned about her dog missing my pool, I thought it was just spite. But she wasn't worried about Buddy missing the water. She was worried about me digging too deep. Rodriguez felt the pieces clicking into place. The excavation. When we started removing the pool, the contractor had to check for underground utilities. Standard procedure. But Karen panicked when she saw how deep we were going. Sarah's voice gained strength as she spoke. She was afraid we'd discover the drainage system. Detective Torres looked up from her evidence bagging. What drainage system? Sarah gestured toward the window overlooking both yards. Karen's been dumping wastewater from her breeding operation directly into the storm drain system. That's why she had the industrial filtration unit installed outside, not to clean the air, but to process liquid waste before it went into the municipal system. That's illegal dumping of contaminated water, Torres said, adding another charge to her growing list. Potential environmental violations, public health hazards. Karen finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I never meant for it to go this far. It started with just 2 dogs. I was lonely after my divorce, and breeding seemed like a way to have purpose, to build something. You built a torture chamber, Rodriguez said flatly. Dr. Walsh, what's your preliminary assessment downstairs? The veterinarian's voice came through his radio, grim and professional. I need immediate transport for 12 animals. We have severe malnutrition, untreated injuries, signs of forced continuous breeding. At least 3 females are in critical condition. Karen's face crumpled. I gave them food. I provided shelter. They were indoor animals, safe from the elements. You kept them in cages barely large enough to stand in, Sarah interrupted, her teacher's instinct for truth cutting through Karen's self-deception. For 3 years, you lectured me about property values and neighborhood standards while running a puppy mill in your basement. Detective Torres closed her evidence bag and stood. Mrs. Whitfield, you're under arrest for operating an unlicensed commercial animal breeding facility, tax evasion, and animal cruelty. You have the right to remain silent. As Torres read Karen her rights, Rodriguez watched the woman who terrorized her neighbors with regulations and codes being led away in handcuffs. The irony was perfect and brutal. Karen had weaponized bureaucracy against others for years, only to be destroyed by the very system she'd used as a weapon. Officer Rodriguez. Sarah Chen touched his arm. What happens now? Now we document everything, get these animals the medical care they need, and let the legal system handle Mrs. Whitfield. Rodriguez looked back toward the basement where his team was still working. And you finish removing your pool without any more interference. Through the kitchen window, they could see neighbors gathering on the street. Word was spreading through the subdivision with the speed of suburban gossip. Karen Whitfield, the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood standards, was being loaded into the back of a police cruiser. There's something else, Sarah said quietly. Something Karen doesn't know yet. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. My ex-husband. Tom works for the State Attorney General's office. Consumer Protection Division. When I tell him about the fake business names, the tax evasion, the unlicensed breeding operation. Sarah's smile held no warmth. Karen thought she was making my life difficult over a pool. She has no idea what's about to hit her. As the police cruiser disappeared around the corner, Rodriguez realized that Karen Whitfield's troubles were just beginning. The woman who'd built her identity around controlling others had just lost control of everything. And the neighbor she tried to destroy was about to become her worst nightmare. Tom Chen's office in the State Attorney General's building overlooked the city's financial district, but his attention was fixed entirely on the documents spread across his mahogany desk. 3 days had passed since Sarah's phone call. 3 days of his consumer protection team working around the clock to unravel the financial web that Karen Whitfield had spun from her suburban basement. The scope is staggering, said Maria Santos, his lead investigator, as she added another folder to the growing pile. We've identified 14 separate business entities, all operating under variations of the same breeding scheme. Suburban, Paws, Golden Dreams, Maple Street Kennels. She even had one called Chen's Champion Dogs. Tom's jaw tightened. She used our name. Gets worse. She's been advertising online using photos of your daughter's old birthday parties by the pool. made it look like the puppies were raised in a loving family environment with children. Maria pulled up a laptop screen showing archived website pages. Look at this testimonial page. She fabricated quotes from satisfied customers, used stock, photos of families with dogs. The irony wasn't lost on Tom. For 2 years since the divorce, he'd listened to Emma complain about crazy neighbor Karen during their weekend visits. He'd dismissed it as typical suburban drama, never imagining that the woman was using his family's image to legitimize a criminal enterprise. What's our case looking like? Ironclad. Wire fraud, mail fraud, tax evasion totaling over $400,000, consumer fraud affecting at least 60 families across 3 states. Maria's smile held no mercy. She kept meticulous records, dates, breeding schedules, financial transactions. It's like she documented her own prosecution. Tom's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Emma's flying in this weekend. Wants to see Karen's arrest on the news. Says it's better than Christmas. Despite everything, Tom smiled. His daughter had inherited his sense of justice and Sarah's protective instincts, a formidable combination. What about the victims? That's where it gets personal. Maria handed him a thick folder marked complaints. We've had families contact us from as far away as Colorado. They paid premium prices for what they thought were ethically bred, health-tested puppies. Instead, they got sick animals with genetic defects, false vaccination records, forged AKC papers. Tom opened the folder to find photographs that made his stomach turn. Puppies with severe hip dysplasia, eye defects, cardiac problems, all the predictable results of continuous inbreeding and neglect. But worse were the photos of children, families who'd saved for months to buy what they thought was a healthy pet, only to face thousands in veterinary bills and heartbreak. The Martinez family in Phoenix spent $8,000 on a champion bloodline golden retriever for their autistic son, Maria continued. The dog had to be euthanized at 6 months old due to genetic heart defects. The medical records were completely fabricated. Jesus. Tom had prosecuted white-collar criminals for 15 years, but cases involving animal cruelty hit differently. The victims weren't just the animals. They were families, children who'd lost beloved pets to Karen's greed. His phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he recognized, Detective Torres from the County Sheriff's Department. Mr. Chen, we have a development in the Whitfield case. I think you're going to want to hear this. Put me on speaker. My investigator is here. Torres's voice filled the office. Karen Whitfield just fired her 3rd attorney. Apparently, she's been trying to convince them to pursue harassment charges against your ex-wife for initiating this persecution. Tom and Maria exchanged glances. She's still blaming Sarah. Gets better. She's also claiming that she's the victim of a neighborhood conspiracy. Says Sarah deliberately removed the pool to force her to call animal control, knowing it would lead to the discovery of her breeding operation. That's... Tom paused, processing the twisted logic. That's actually brilliant, in a completely insane way. There's more. Whitfield's been calling the jail commissary trying to get other inmates to corroborate her story that she was set up. Problem is, the calls are recorded. Maria leaned forward. What's she saying on these calls? She's admitting to everything. Tax evasion, forged documents, illegal breeding practices, but she's framing it all as justified because her neighbors were out to get her. We've got hours of recorded confessions. Tom felt the familiar satisfaction of a case coming together. Perfectly. Detective, please tell me she's still trying to represent herself. As of this morning, yes. The judge granted her request to act as her own counsel. Her bail hearing is tomorrow at 10 a.m. After Torres hung up, Tom and Maria sat in contemplative silence. 28 years of practicing law had taught Tom that the most dangerous criminals were often those who believed their own justifications. Karen Whitfield wasn't just a puppy mill operator. She was a woman who'd convinced herself that her crimes were righteous, that everyone else was the problem. She's going to destroy herself at that bail hearing, Maria said. Probably. But I want to make sure. Tom reached for his phone. Sarah deserves to see this through to the end. He dialed his ex-wife's number, surprised by how natural it felt to be working with her again, even indirectly. Their marriage hadn't survived his workaholic tendencies and her need for stability, but their shared sense of justice had never wavered. Tom, Sarah's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd spent 3 days dealing with media attention, curious neighbors, and the lingering smell of industrial disinfectant from the house next door. The bail hearing is tomorrow. I think you should. Be there. I don't know if I can face her again. The things she said about me in those jail phone calls. Sarah's voice trailed off. Sarah, listen to me. Karen Whitfield spent 3 years terrorizing you and our neighbors while running a criminal enterprise. She used our daughter's photos to sell sick puppies to families. She tried to weaponize city bureaucracy against you for removing your own. Pull. Tom's voice carried the prosecutor's certainty that had won hundreds of cases. Tomorrow, she faces the consequences. You have every right to be there when justice is served. Will you be there? Tom looked at his calendar, at the depositions and hearings that suddenly seemed far less important than supporting the mother of his child. Yes, we'll be there together. After he hung up, Maria was watching him with an amused expression. You. No, for divorced people, you two sure make a good team. Tom considered this. Sarah's phone call 3 days ago had given him the biggest case of his career, a multi-state consumer fraud investigation that would make headlines and protect countless families from Karen's predatory practices. But more than that, it had reminded him why he'd fallen in love with Sarah in the first place, her unwavering moral compass and her courage to stand up for what was right. Yeah, he said, gathering the case files. We do. Outside his office window, the city hummed with evening traffic. Somewhere across town, Karen Whitfield sat in a county jail cell, still convinced she was the victim of a vast neighborhood conspiracy. Tomorrow, she would stand before a judge and learn the difference between accountability and persecution. And for the first time in 3 years, Sarah Chen would face her tormentor from a position of absolute strength. The woman who'd tried to destroy her neighbor over a pool removal was about to discover that some battles, once started, can only end one way.